Good evening. Tonight is apparently top knot night. Well, I don't think we call these top knots now. They're what, man buns? We learned about this in the context of samurai having these puffs on the top. So it's, I think it would be something that the samurai would use to kind of cushion their helmets in addition to tying up their hair. But I don't know. It's been a long time since I dug into that. Okay, so recently I've been experiencing a kind of fear that I've learned how I'm familiar with it now, a little familiar with it. I have some guesses about what it means, but it occurred to me that I don't really have a lot of language for it. I don't remember whether, well, I don't know whether other people have talked about this. I'm sure someone has, but I don't know how to recognize it. So I've been calling it existential fear. So the way that this has been appearing for me recently is as I've been, excuse me, as I've been working with this business of just looking directly at my experience, at my embodied experience, to see where free will actually is. Where do I actually have choice? Like, it's in a lot fewer places than I pretend. So if there is a point of experienced choice, it's actually much smaller than I normally act like. Okay, this is particularly obvious with, like earlier today, I was trying to suspend something to dry. And it was, for complicated reasons, I had to use some pieces of floss to get this thing to suspend correctly. And in the course of tying this up, there's a piece of floss that the ends kept fraying, and as I would tie it, it would just kind of untie as I was trying to finish the knot. And my response was to start getting angry. I didn't choose the anger, not that I'm aware of. The anger doesn't help. But there's almost like this attitude of, if I aggress at it, maybe I'll intimidate it into cooperating. I didn't really choose any of that. So, yeah, so I have a lot less choice than I think. This is important for things like, well, what do I do with my attention? Do I have control of my attention? Bang! Right? And something makes a loud noise and suddenly I don't have control of my attention for a moment. I try to bring awareness into my body and I keep noticing, oh, it's in my head now. I've been writing for a while, so I don't, like, I have a lot more energy in my head. So trying to get back into my body, it's not something I can really control on time scale of minutes, but I can maybe affect it on time scale of tens of minutes by trying, but I can't keep trying forever. I don't have control over the ability to keep trying relentlessly. There's something more subtle. So the fear that arises is from the possibility of seeing the complete lack of choice. I talked about this in a previous video, and what I was talking about is the logic of how that fear, it doesn't make sense to let that fear control whether I look. And I won't go over the logic of that right now. But I want to go instead in a slightly different direction, talking about what the quality of the fear is. So this is something that I keep bumping into in different ways. It's not, so the way that, so it's a kind of horror feeling, a sort of, like it's a very specific creepy feeling that comes up from the body. It comes up in a way that is really different from things like when I got angry at the floss. That was like, ah, there's this thing low in my belly that just shoots energy up into my head, and then my head starts going, this stupid floss, fuck the floss, blah, blah, blah. Eventually just tore it up, cut it up, threw it in the trash, came up with a different solution. And like there's something about the process of that energy moving that has a kind of familiarity and normalcy to it. It doesn't feel like it's a different category than like I look at a painting and I feel moved. I listen to music and I feel moved. What's moving? Well, this kind of energy. But looking at the possibility, not just a thought, but the actual lived experience of if I keep digging, I might discover that there is no choice anywhere. So the fear there has this quality of, oh God, I'll be trapped. It's this immense isolation fear. It's this flash that this doesn't have a lot of cognitive content. So this gives me the impression that this might actually be some kind of emotional flashback. Part of how I imagine a lot of how modern culture works at all comes from systemized ways of traumatizing children. Not all of it is about traumatizing children, but quite a stunning amount of it is, or a really surprising amount of it is. And so tracking, how does that work? How do you get somebody to disconnect from their body and distrust their inner knowing in a systematic way? Well, you threaten them, undermine them in particular ways, and that's going to be a very powerful, violating experience for them. So I suspect that what I'm encountering is properly called a trauma, or rather a trauma response. But I don't think that it's trauma compared to normal functioning. I think what I'm bumping into is something like the core operating system of culture, the places where that's made of pain. It's going to be the way that it's made of pain in me. Sometimes my left jaw gets a little out of joint. But I don't remember anything associated with this. The experience is something more like just being raw, horrified, at the possibility. Like, there's this sense of, if I see that, it's not just I will be stuck in a machine I can't interface with. That's a kind of easy to imagine in a particular way, and then it feels like there's room for story or something there. But the shift is actually more like, oh, if that's true and I see it clearly, there won't be any place for anything that even looks like me. It's not that I'll be trapped, it's more like the the sense of self would get suffocated, I think, and just popped into non-existence. Looking at that, there's this like, I can intellectually understand why that's actually a useful thing. There's something about, to the extent that a sense of self is built out of ignorance, this whole system not being able to see itself clearly, then that self is a lie. It's an approximation. There's this, this is mental. Like, this is like I can see the picture in a bubble. But part of the point of the bubble, part of the point of the thought bubble, is that I'm over here looking at the thought and I can see how the thought makes sense. So there's this impression of anything that is an experience of pleasure or delight or fulfillment or relief from suffering, any of that that is valuing there being a core self, so that the self has to be there in order for any of that to have meaning. Like, that picture is fine, except if that self, if what is meant by self in there, if what's meant by me is actually something like an approximation process based on ignorance, then what valuing this is doing is valuing ignorance. That sort of guarantees a kind of mortality. It guarantees that that in order for this system to create value, it has to stay deluded and psychotic, micropsychotic, the hypopsychotic, but it's psychosis, disconnection from reality in a systematic way, living in a different world than the body is in. Hallucinating a false self like this, that would definitely count. I don't clearly see this. This is not, I see beyond the self by any means. This is me staring at this going, and the horror is in some kind of orientation to, if that is true, if there is no choice, then this is inevitable. Eventually I will see through it. I think I have seen through this to some extent in different bursts, but it didn't, it wasn't stable enough for me to decide the question of free will. That was actually that's been a recurring problem in almost all of my experiences of this. That I'm under the impression that there is something I'm supposed to do or something I could do, but I can't quite see what it is. If there's literally nothing possible to do, and that all of that is just an attempt to do some automatic processes on the inside. And I see that clearly. Well, who sees that clearly? Oh, well, a confusion sees that clearly. So there's an attempt to guard the confusion itself. So I think that horror feeling is, it might be borrowed from, like, as I reflect on this, I remember there was once where I honestly believed I was going to physically die. I was, I don't quite remember my age, somewhere in my teens, like 14, 16, somewhere in that ballpark. I was out hiking with some friends, and we there was a fork in the trail, and we got much better progress than we were expecting. We were going to head to a campground that we were already really familiar with, but we looked at the other one and we haven't gone down that path. And that path went really high up above the snow line. We were not ready for snow camping. And while we were up there, the sun set, it started snowing, the wind was blowing, and we started losing track of our trail. I remember one moment while we were trying to get some water boiling in order to heat some ravioli, and we were having difficulty with our fingers, me more so than others. I had circulation problems as a teen in my fingers. And I was desperately cold, and I was starting to have some hypothermic reactions, and I was trying to open a Snickers wrapper, and my fingers couldn't grip tightly enough to apply enough force to tear open the plastic. When I saw that, I knew I'm going to die. No, that obviously turned out to be false, but I remember that experience really vividly. Part of it included this kind of rush, this creepy feeling like it was simultaneously relieving and horrifying. There's a lot of similarity between that experience and this one that I've been bumping into looking at this bit with free will. When something clicks and I get the possibility, it's not even a certainty for me, just the possibility that at the end of looking at this, there may be no impression of me at all in the system, in this whole system. Like, what that's like. And I combine that with things like, there's this sense of, then what is? What is? What exists? And it's not just a befuddlement, like, this doesn't make logical sense. There's actually an enormous kind of loneliness. A decent approximation would be a sudden glimpse into the possibility of actually experiencing all of it as me, and there being no other, no possibility of other. This is not a possibility, this is not about there is no other, like here I am on a desert island and I'm alone. Because at least in that case, it is conceivable, it is possible for there to be an other. Somebody could show up on the island, for instance. People could come, people could show up, like on a boat or whatever. But in this existential version, there's a clarity of, if I go, what's left? If I am an illusion and I see that clearly, then I look around at other people. That's just more of the same thing. I really don't want that to be true. There's a horror about that. It's so, and I can hear the language of what I'm saying, the way that it's very similar to the teachings of no self in Buddhism. If you realize that there is no self, then there's an end to suffering. It's like a disorientation looking at that. In some sense, I can see that because a lot of the things that I experience as discomfort, this kind of suffering, what am I supposed to be doing next? Oh, it's not supposed to. How do I let go of the supposed to? I don't know. I can't see the let go of. Okay, doing a lot of shoulds. Let me breathe, focus on the body. How do I do that? I'm lost in thought again. Wait, okay, here I am. Like this like that jamming around is it's something like a process that that this system uses to keep two things from connecting. It's like preventing a recognition that this whole that the awareness keeps going around is empty. There's no me there. I can mentally recognize some of that, but recognizing it on the inside, horror, existential fear. But I could see where at the other side of something like that, there would be no suffering. It's not just no suffering because I'm dead. Like that's kind of true. That would be true. But it's more like, because there isn't any impression of a self to protect, there's no reason to put all of that effort into it. And then there can be this effortless attunement of this with truth. Absolutely effortless, perfectly graceful. There's no ill-fitting. I'm pretty sure that what that suffering is how we experience our dissonance with truth. So I'm feeling into this. There's some kind of, I can see the logic of it. There's a kind of inevitability. Supposedly, when I recognize, I was talking about choice and then I switched over to self. The thing is something like, if I have no choice, what am I? There's a possibility that there actually is a stable experience of choice. I've sometimes gotten glimmers of this as a possibility. This is not meaning to dismiss the models of physics, etc. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm talking about the experience of interfacing with this. What is the experience of choice? Where is there actually choice? If there is a point of choice, I would like this mind to come to understand it better, so that this mind's tools can be in service to whatever that choice is about. And there's this scary possibility that causes me to flinch away from that. I think this is the core difficulty. There's definitely a false sense of self, a false sense of capacity to choose. That's very clear. Go around pretending I can, like, today I'm going to exercise, and then I sit and I write for 12 hours. I love writing. I get possessed by writing. I enjoy the possession. And still, that was interesting. I was not entirely conscious of that choice. In fact, I'm not sure I chose. I'm not sure I'm the one or thing that chose. And yet I still tell myself, today I'm going to exercise. I tell myself things like that. Less now. But that means that what I tell myself I am going to do is not entangled with, it's not based on where I actually have choice. Do I have the choice to intend things? Do intentions affect behavior? I don't know. Where do the intentions come from? That's not a thought. It's not a question about thought and theory. That's a question about direct experience. When I intend something, why do I intend it instead of something else? When I first turned this on, part of the energy where it was coming from is recognizing, oh yeah, this thing I'm encountering around free will, this is evoking some of the same feelings that I've had primarily from plant medicine work. I had a pretty intense experience with ayahuasca in April 2019. And like easily the second worst experience of my life. The first worst experience of my life happened at my Bufo retreat in Mexico this last November. So it actually managed to trump the ayahuasca experience. But both of those had this quality of leaving time and experiencing the structure of reality beyond time, and then coming back in, but recognizing that while I'm outside of time, there's no while I'm outside of time. I'm not there for a while, I'm there eternally. And the deep recognition, the experiential recognition, that having had that experience, this means that time cannot contextualize experience. Time is part of experience. So very clearly, the structure of all that isn't held by time. It's held by something else, which means that the experience of being in time, when that ends, returns us to the eternal beyond time. Something I can see very clearly there. I suspect this is a big chunk of what's going on with death, what the experience of death is actually like. So, I also know from past experience that when I talk about this, this is very confusing to a lot of people. I don't necessarily expect that to have made sense. I would like it to. So what I'm pointing at, to me, is crystal clear. I feel like I'm describing something very precise. This is not, it's kind of this, thing, dude. It's like you get the oneness of all. Like it's not that big at all. I feel like I could draw a diagram. This is really precise. It's very clear. Time cannot give the context for existence. Existence gives the context for time. But what is existence? That's tricky to say. But the fact that it is possible to leave time and enter it, re-enter it, like the language is terrible for this. I might do a session. I have some faint memory of having tried doing a session on this before, but I may want to try again. I've deepened a little bit more into this essence I was describing before as clear knowing. I would like to try speaking from there when I have a little more energy, when I can show up more clearly in service to this. But I'm getting a little off into the weeds. The thing is that those experiences brought to me a kind of horror, this horror, this existential fear, recognition of the totality of existence and this curious sense of being vastly alone. All of being is, for lack of better language, me. And there's no possibility of an other. It is all just me. I hallucinate this entire experience in order to have an impression of others, so that in this strange dream, I can satisfy a want that is part of me. But then when I die, I return to the wholeness and the loneliness and the ecstasy and the horror and the joy and the infinite, all of the things all together. Really creepy. I can feel a way in which I have missed something important. Not like there's a problem, more like, oh, this was a necessary step. I can feel that. But there are parts of me that do not trust truth. What if it destroys me? I can see the logic of, well, then I'm going to be destroyed one way or the other. So the question is, how graceful, how easy, how integrated, how much of what I desire can be in dialogue with truth so that my desires, to the maximum extent possible, can be fulfilled. And there was this bit that I described in terms of, this is the solution to the problem of evil. How do I come to prefer what is true, whatever it may be? How do I find ecstasy in that? And that actually transforms the entire picture, sincerely wanting to do that. But parts of me are still scared. And the way I experience that fear has a very distinct flavor. It's even calling it a fear, I recognize, is kind of a funny word. It is more like the peaceful, horrifying knowing that I am about to die. I don't know that it's the same thing, but I'm guessing this is why it often gets called ego death. That's all I want to do for tonight.